morning, I'm Manny Larkin, Vice President and Director of Community Engagement of the Amerind Museum. Welcome to Songs of Power and Prayer in the Columbia Plateau, a common thread through tradition and change with Professor Chad Hamill. Before we begin the program today, I want to acknowledge that Amerind is located in southeastern Arizona, on lands where O'odham, Hopi, Oshwe, Yoweme, and Apache families lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are grateful for what all of these communities, rich in history, have to teach us. Thank you to our program sponsor, Desert Diamond Casinos, as well as our members and donors who enable Amerind to provide free online programming and fulfill Amerind's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist Amerind in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit amerind.org. On March 5th, Amerind will host the second annual Texas Canyon Mountain Bike Fun Ride. The course takes riders through 7.8 miles of the Amerind Museum campus that is normally closed to the public. Please visit the events section of Amerind's Facebook page or website, amerind.org, for registration details. Then on March 12th, Amerind in Tucson presents Gabriel Ayala, Concert for Healing at the Fox Tucson Theater. Gabriel Ayala and his quintet will perform music across several genres, including classical, jazz, and Ayala's signature jazzmenko. For more information about this Amerind in Tucson performance, visit the events section of amerind.org or the Fox Tucson Theater's website, foxtucson.com. All right, so Chad S. Hamill received his PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Colorado. His scholarship is focused on song traditions of the interior Northwest, including those carried by his Spokane ancestors. In addition to his book, Songs of Power and Prayer in the Columbia Plateau, he has produced numerous articles centered on the Columbia Plateau songs and ceremony, exploring topics ranging from sovereignty to Indigenous ecological knowledge. Prior to his position as Vice President for Native American Initiatives, Hamill served as chair of the Department of Applied Indigenous Studies at Northern Arizona University and as chair of the Indigenous Music Section of the Society for Ethnomusicology. Currently, he sits on the Advisory Council of the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage and is a 2020-2021 Fellow for Indigenous Arts and Expression at California Institute of the Arts. If you would like to ask any questions during the program today, please type your question in the Q&A chat box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will be gathering those questions to share with our speaker after the presentation. We will also be sending a link of a recording to today's program to all of our Zoom registrants. And with that, welcome, Chad. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lemlemch, Waches Kohalt Petsia, Chad Hamill, Chanakai Michlu East West, Chin Spokane, Chetsin Piels. Good day, everybody. I say good day rather than good morning. It's morning for me, but I recognize that we have folks in different time zones. So good day to you, wherever you are. Good to be with you. As Annie mentioned, I'm from the Spokane tribe, located in present-day Washington State. Wanted to thank the Amerind Museum and Annie Larkin in particular for organizing this program today. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. The topic today is songs. So I figure I would start with one. This is a Coyote Song. Ho, hey, yo, hey. Ho, hey, yay, yay. Ho, hey, ya. Ho, hey, ya. Ho, hey, yo, hey. Ho, hey, yay, yay. Ho, hey. Oh hey, hey, oh hey, oh hey, 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 oh hey, oh hey, ho hey, oh hey, ho hey, 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 ho hey, ho hey, ho hey, oh hey, ho hey, 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 ho hey, ho hey, ho hey, hey, oh hey, oh hey, hey, oh hey, oh hey, 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 oh hey, oh hey, hey, Lemlemch. So the Spokane tribe are one of many tribes located in the interior Northwest, an area referred to as the Columbia Plateau. And with that, I'm going to share the screen. So this is a map here of what's known as the Columbia Plateau region. It encompasses parts of current-day Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and goes up into British Columbia in present-day Canada. So for millennia, songs had been at the center of our lifeways. Prior to European contact, songs were integral to everyday life. Whether hunting, fishing, or gathering roots and berries, the songs were ever present. And in the context of sacred ceremonies, songs were a catalyst for spiritual power and healing. So songs were not composed. They were given to individuals in dreams in a process of spiritual transmission from the spirit realm. Songs might also be received by an individual while they're awake. There are places within the landscape where songs are known to reside, what I refer to as the sacred geography of song. So if a song is given and received by an individual, it comes with responsibilities and obligations on the part of its singer. And that's rooted in a kind of reciprocity between our everyday mundane realm, if you will, and the spirit realm. So for Indigenous communities throughout the interior Northwest, and for that matter, throughout present-day North America and the world, such songs are used as a sacred technology to bring individuals and communities into balance. So while working toward a PhD in ethnomusicology at the University of Colorado, this relationship between songs and spiritual power became my primary focus. This interest was fueled in part by my own experience with songs in ceremonial contexts, but it was also rooted in a desire to know more about my family history, in particular how Gibson Eli, a great uncle I never knew in life, used songs as medicine to heal. So Gib came from a long tradition of medicine people that stretched back through the generations. When the first Jesuits arrived in the interior Northwest in the 1840s, they encountered vibrant song and healing traditions that likely predated Christ. So when I talk about moving through the generations, we're going way back. In addition to the transmission of songs from the spirit realm, individuals also received prophecies. In my book, I focused on one such prophecy that specifically referenced the arrival of the Catholics. Oral history maintains that Circling Raven was the primary leader of the Coeur d'Alene from 1660 to 1760, 100 years during which he cultivated loyalty through a blend of insight and wisdom. Also recognized as a powerful prophet, he was possessed of the ability to shepherd the Coeur d'Alene people into a future foretold through the raspy exhorts of his invaluable Sumesh. Sumesh is the term for spirit guide. His Sumesh was the raven. In 1740, while hunting buffalo within lands that belonged to the Crow and Blackfeet, Circling Raven began singing his prophecy songs, and he told his people to listen for 3 ravens that were coming to give them news. In just a few minutes, 3 ravens circled the encampment and gave out 3 calls. Circling Raven asked the people if they understood. His people told him, "No, we don't understand birds." Circling Raven told the people that the ravens had said, quote, "You have enemies who have already spied you out. They are already preparing for an attack. Therefore, prepare yourselves." This is how the Coeur d'Alene chief of those days gained his name. So after the buffalo hunt, the Coeur d'Alene set out for their permanent winter camp in what is now known as Kingston, Idaho. According to the oral record, Circling Raven conducted a medicine dance that year, fulfilling a vision experienced some 20 years prior, in which he had been told of Jesus and his resurrection. During the same ceremony, Circling Raven shared a prophecy in which, quote, "men in black robes would one day appear on the horizon, armed with little more than cross sticks, new words, and powerful medicines to help the people." For decades, Circling Raven anxiously sought out the black robes, but as he entered his final years, he accepted that the eyes he had been granted in life would not, in the end, behold them. He assembled his people and recounted his visions one last time, reminding them that the fulfillment of his prophecies offered protection in a world that would soon see dramatic changes. Before his death in 1760, he asked his son, Twisted Earth, to look after his prophecy as well as the people. Every summer thereafter, Twisted Earth traveled to the valley of the Salem in search of black robes. Some 20 years later, news arrived in a form familiar to his father. In preparation for the medicine dance that year, Twisted Earth told his people to hang poles at each end of the 12 by 20-foot lodge. Once the dance began, a raven and crow arrived, flying in through a hole at the top of the lodge and settling upon one of the poles. To honor the presence of the winged messengers, the people began to sing their prophecy songs. After some time, the birds let out a series of caws and took flight, following the line of smoke from the 3 fires, flying out of the lodge and disappearing into darkness. They told Twisted Earth it would be 60 years before the black robes would enter the plateau, so he should be patient and continue the medicine dance. So the prophets of the plateau featured in the foregoing paragraphs participated in a tradition formed through centuries of direct encounters with the spirit realm. Such encounters provided a window through which prophets of the 18th and 19th centuries in the plateau could gaze into a largely unrecognizable future, bringing inconceivable changes that would dramatically reshape their world. Prophecies of this time served as an early warning system, and the extent to which the people rallied by actively bringing a vision to fruition determined their ability not only to meet impending changes, but also to survive. The fulfillment of a prophecy was often dependent on song, carried by the voices of the prophet as well as the people, sustaining and nurturing a vision from its origin to its end. Song was power, song was prayer, and within communities where the presence of the spirit realm was pervasive, song was always there. The centrality of song among the Coeur d'Alene was not lost on a black robe by the name of Pierre-Jean de Smet, who sought to instill within indigenous Columbia Plateau people the words of a foreign prophet, one who lived and died a world away. So the following is an account of the first meeting between Twisted Earth and Pierre de Smet, as told by the Coeur d'Alene leader, Joseph Saltisse. It appeared initially in the Saga of the Coeur d'Alene Indians, edited by Edward Cowratch and Tom Connolly. Upon his arrival in Coeur d'Alene country in April 1842, Father Pierre-Jean de Smet was escorted to the lodge of Twisted Earth. The air within the lodge hung heavy. It had been 100 years since Circling Raven's vision, and there before Twisted Earth sat the fulfillment of a prophecy. After a period of prolonged and quiet contemplation, Twisted Earth spoke. My father looked for you for a long time. Many times he searched the entire Bitterroot Valley, and many times he went beyond the divide. Finally, at an old age, he asked me to continue the search for the black robe. It has been fully 100 years since my father first sang the prophecy songs of the coming of the black robe. When he died, I continued to watch for the black robe. Now it has been 80 years of crossing the mountains, looking throughout the Bitterroot Valley, and following my father's footsteps many times beyond the divide. I had full tribal backing during enemy attacks north and south of the divide. We spared no valley, no plain, and we crossed every mountain to fulfill my father's prophecy. Today that prophecy has been fulfilled. I thank the Great Spirit in prayers that I will say the rest of my life, not just in words, but from my heart as I embrace this fulfillment of my devoted 80-year search. I am listening, together with all my children scattered throughout the valley, along the St. Joe and the Coeur d'Alene rivers, and a number of families at the head of this lake. Had they known that my father's prophecy was going to be fulfilled today, they would all be here to give you a reception. They all wished to see this day, as did I, and my father before me. We have been disliked at times for seeking the Christian faith, disliked at times for not accepting the faith of one who rambled on and on, disliked at times for trespassing and trying to find the black robe. But now, let us hear you. So by de Smet's own account, the people wasted little time in providing that reception. He says, quote, "The tidings of my coming soon spread through all the country. The Indians were to be seen flocking from all sides, through forest and plain, by the rivers and the great lake, to meet me, and to hear the word of God from the very lips of the black gown. My visit, consequently, had the most beneficial results. I baptized all the little children in the tribe and a good number of adults who had hastened with holy avidity to come and receive the mustard seed mentioned in the gospel." So there's an image here of de Smet with Indian leaders throughout the interior Northwest. It's taken at Fort Vancouver in 1859 during de Smet's peace tour. So de Smet's plan for the Coeur d'Alene and other Salish tribes was modeled after the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. It was a process in the early 17th century by which the Jesuits corralled the indigenous Waorani into a series of Catholic townships along the upper Parana River, in part to shield them from the depravities at the hands of Spanish and Portuguese settlers. De Smet was all too aware of another important innovation introduced by the Jesuits in Paraguay, who had a difficult time making initial contact with the Waorani. Although music was marginalized within the newly founded Society of Jesus, by the end of the 16th century, Jesuit institutions had become primary hubs for the development of sacred music throughout Europe. The religious sensibilities of Jesuit missionaries dispatched to South America were formed within such institutions, virtually ensuring that music would be heard emanating from the missions of Paraguay in the early 17th century. The full utility of music, however, would not become evident to the Jesuits until they began exploring the rivers utilized by Spanish and Portuguese explorers nearly a century before. Traveling by canoe, the Jesuits often joined one another in the singing of familiar Catholic hymns. Intrigued by these foreign songs of strangers, the Waorani began emerging from the forests along the river's shore to absorb their odd melodies. Just when all means to reach the Waorani seemed to have been exhausted, a powerful lure. They immediately capitalized on the opportunity, adding instruments to their canoe excursions, weaving a musical web in which the Waorani would soon be caught. Song became their central strategy, and they wasted no time in exploiting its potential. Quote, "A missionary could hardly begin singing some canticles relating Christian doctrine, but these savage infidels at the time would instantly bolt out of their thickets and lurking holes, and follow with the greatest transports the voices they heard. When the missionary perceived a great number gathered about him, he would then set out with preaching evangelical truths, thus prepare the way for founding a new reduction." So Pierre de Smet and his fellow missionaries used songs in the same way in the interior Northwest, but what they didn't anticipate was the songs becoming indigenized. Salish enthusiasm for melody was nothing new. For millennia, tribes throughout the plateau had continually offered melodies in the form of prayers to pierce the veil that separated them from the realm of their ancestors and their spirit guides. Reaching the spirits required a good heart and strong voice, resounding with resolve and conviction, an approach that often offended the delicate European sensibilities of the Jesuits and the Rocky Mountain missions. Referring to hymns sung in Latin by the Salish congregation at St. Ignatius Mission in 1894, Father Lawrence Palladino, while allowing that, quote, "They sing them to this day not only tolerably well musically, but with a distinct and clear pronunciation of every word," he adds, "Still, we must admit that their congregational singing, particularly when the males join in, has ever been wild and savage-like." Bishop James O'Connor found, quote, "the congregational singing simply shocking. It sounded as if at least a dozen harmonious souls were scattered among the congregation." These priests were reacting to the indigenization of the hymns, absorbed, reconstructed, and resung as expressions of native identity. By adopting a new hymn and, quote, distorting it in such a manner that it became unrecognizable, singing it at the top of their voices at least 10 times a day, the Salish made the hymns their own, infusing them with the emotion and power necessary to bridge a chasm between worlds. From the beginning, the Catholic hymns were indeed inhabiting their souls, taking a form the priests could not recognize, either in sound or in spirit. So at this point, I want to demonstrate in melodic terms how the hymns were indigenized. So we're going to move into kind of a listening phase here of the talk. So with this particular hymn, it's adapted from the Gregorian chant Dies Irae, but very little remains here of the original Latin hymn composed for the Requiem Mass. Absent the florid melody of its Gregorian antecedent, Quollin Suitin is sung much slower to allow for the emotive melodic movements indicative of Columbia Plateau song style, and by that I mean indigenous Columbia Plateau song style. The textual changes are also significant, with a line originally expressing concern for the dead, for a dead one's sins, altered to, quote, "what he, she has forgotten," a probable reference to the indigenous plateau values of paying one's debts and the putting away of the medicine bundle. So translation here, you're going to hear this hymn, of course, in Salish. We wanted to give you a translation. God, and the term for God is Kwalansuten. God, have pity on my dead one. Also his, her soul, also what he or she has forgotten, which he or she has taken of the bad. The following is sung by Johnny R. Lee, who is a well-respected Flathead Salish cultural leader and a very important source when I was working on this research in this book. Bear with me 1 second here. There it is. Okay, here we go. This is Johnny R. Lee.
God pity my dead one.
Chad, could you kindly turn up the volume on your audio player?
Yes. Here, let me, thanks for letting me know. It's one of those things you just wouldn't know. And I forgot to check the box to optimize. Yeah, this should be much better. All right, let's try this again. Let me know if that's not better.
Will do.
Kwalansuten kon meant in temne. God pity my dead one. no clo in kleptomies lot quest Gotland Zoten Gotland Zoten Con Nament Loin Temene Neu Lotsen Geld Neu Lo in Leptemis Lots quest
Okay, so in this hymn, Arlie illustrates the emotive power of native Columbia Plateau song style using a blend of upward and downward melodic glides. And I'll give you an example of that. Arlie sweeps up to the destination pitch and holds it before casting a downward arc with the power to grab the listener viscerally. So when he goes, Con, Amen. Those movements there, those melodic glides, are taken from traditional Salish song style, and they're frankly much more engaging, emotive than their European antecedents. So in such phrases, one can hear the longing for a loved one, recently lost, as well as feel the sadness emerging from the shadows of a life now forever bound to memory. In native song style, one phrase can be imbued with all of this, taking the community into the depths of despair and lifting it up again, working through the pain on the arc of a melody that, like the indomitable spirit of native people, continually looks forward and moves ahead. Okay, so in what became known as the quote-unquote Indian wake, the hymn Chalip's Chaum, Daylight's Prayer, would be offered at first light after a night of prayers and of singing. This is a little bit more about this particular song. All-night ceremonies and morning songs were common among Columbia Plateau tribes before contact, and the use of Chalip's Chaum in the context of all-night wakes represents another important mediation between Indigenous peoples and the Jesuits. In the mid-1840s, Father Mangarini discussed, quote, a night-long vigil during which the Salish alternate the recitation of prayers, especially the rosary, with the singing of hymns as they circle the corpse. Referring to Salish traditions brought into a reconfigured and indigenized Catholic wake, the words to Chalip's Chaum describe meeting the daylight with Jesus. So quote the translation here. You, my Jesus, I am meeting the daylight. You, my Jesus, you are my heart, because I am very pitiful. You are going to protect me from my enemy. Mary, you are my mother. You are going to pray for me. So this recording that you're about to hear of Khalip's Chaum, Daylight's Prayer, is sung by Joe Woodcock and others. It's a good example of how these sounded sung as a group. They were typically sung collectively. Pay attention again to how they approach notes, gliding upward with each word, and it's very pronounced in this recording. Again, this is indicative of that pre-contact Salish song style.
Khalip's Chaum, The Morning Hymn by Joe Woodcock.
Okay, so in the 1960s, my great uncle Gibson Eli and Mitch Michael, who is pictured there center in the foreground, he was a Coeur d'Alene Indian hymn singer. They teamed up with a renegade Catholic priest by the name of Tom Connolly. You see Tom Connolly there in the background. He's doing the recording, and they're actually recording some of these hymns. So in some respects, this partnership, if you will, with Gibson Eli, Mitch Michael, and Tom Connolly, who referred to these two men as his grandfathers, this was a natural outgrowth of the indigenized hymns that took root in the 19th century. And unlike his predecessors, his Jesuit predecessors, Tom Connolly looked to these two men as teachers and learned from them. And it was much more even-handed than it would have been prior to Tom Connolly in terms of, the Jesuit priests clamping down on elements of traditional culture. So the Indian Center in Spokane became an incubator within which, when I say they, talking about the three of them here, in which they refashioned the Christmas Midnight Mass, changing its constitution at a molecular level. With drums in hand, Michael and Eli opened with a native blessing song, leading a procession of participants into the area where the Mass would be held. After the offering of bread and wine, came Eli, Michael, and Connolly's most bold and innovative contribution, the cup dance. Stemming from the use of the traditional Cho-Cham prayer song that Michael had introduced at the August 15th celebration a few years before, they went much further, adapting elements of the traditional ceremony in which the song appeared. In addition to a native song, the Mass now included its ancient corollary, native dance. Making its Catholic debut at a large diocesan-wide Mass at the Spokane Coliseum, it was unlike any Mass those in attendance had ever seen. As the Cho-Cham prayer song began, three boys holding eagle fans and dressed in traditional regalia knelt on one knee, facing the altar. The introduction of the song, like the sections between each verse, consisted of an elongated melody sung by Michael and Eli over the free-metered rumbling of the drum. As the drum transitioned to a steady, upbeat pattern and the song settled into place, the boys began dancing to and from the altar, returning to a kneeling position between verses. During the final verse, the boys danced in a circle around the altar, honoring the foods and the body and blood of Jesus with tools passed down through the generations, age-old technologies used long before Indigenous Columbia Plateau peoples had ever heard the black robes utter his name. So I'm going to show you a video here of a cup dance that I recorded back in 2009. If we can get it up. Give it another try here. Oh, there we are. Here we go. So in closing, whether sung in the longhouse during a traditional winter dance or in the context of Catholic services, songs have continued to be utilized by Plateau tribes as vehicles for spiritual expression and power. This speaks to Indigenous resilience during the process of colonization. Traditional songs went underground for a time and re-emerged when the coast was clear. In addition, Catholicism offered new outlets for Indigenous identity and expression through the Indian hymns. Between the two, traditional and Catholic, we find seamless continuity, both in singing style and how the technology of song is used to maintain balance and bring healing to our communities. Lem Lemch, thank you.
And thank you so much, Chad. That was a fabulous presentation. And we do have questions. Our first is, where can our audience find your book?
It's on Amazon, and it published by Oregon State University Press. You can also get it there. It's strangely blurred, like it's some sort of weird edit. Wait, there it is. So you can do it, I think, through their website as well. And in fact, the hymns that you heard are from their website, the book's website at Oregon State University Press. So if you want to listen to more of those, you could go to that site to do it. But should be copies available on Amazon. I haven't checked recently, but I think they're in stock.
And we will gladly provide a link to Oregon State University Press in the follow-up email to all of our Zoom registrants.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Another question, do you provide programs in which you sing Indigenous songs?
Not so much these days, and you may know why. It's been a rough couple of years, and there's been limited opportunities, of course, to do in-person functions. And so I don't have a regular presentation that I do, but I do things like this periodically. So nothing scheduled at the moment.
And are you aware of other instances, such as that with Tom Connolly, in which a member of the church worked with tribal community members to integrate aspects of Native culture in the church?
Yeah. Certainly there have been cases, in particular with the Jesuits, the Catholics, where because of the things that I mentioned, a long history, of integrating elements of Indigenous culture into Catholic services, really as a tool of bringing communities in, right, into Catholic ways of being and seeing the world. So, I mentioned the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. That's one of the earliest known instances of that. But it's also curious that there were some Jesuits in China, and I'm a bit foggy on it now. I think it was in the 16th century, who had started to weave in elements of traditional Chinese culture. But eventually that did not take, and they were more or less shown the door, thrown out of the country. But there is, in the Northwest and up into British Columbia, there are cases in which Catholic priests were actively incorporating these elements. But what's unique about this story is that in my research, no one had taken it as far as my great uncle Gibson Eli, Mitch Michael, and Tom Connolly. And in many respects, it was very innovative. It was also bold in terms of the work that they did. And, what's important about that work, I mentioned this before, is Tom Connolly's orientation, which was different than Jesuits before him, in that he looked at these two men as his teachers. And he was brought into a process of indigenization rather than it being the other way around, where indigenous peoples were brought into Catholicism. And so that's a very compelling aspect of the story, and I think represents, in my view, a kind of evolution on the part of Jesuits who were not very open. They were, upon contact in the interior Northwest, I mentioned the 1840s, that's when they arrived, Pierre de Smet, they were more accommodating than like their Protestant counterparts. But it's important to note that they were still very, very repressive and did all that they could to discourage the communities there, the First Peoples, from engaging in their traditional ceremonies. The winter dance that I mentioned, for instance, was strongly discouraged. And I talked about these things going underground. So we're not sugarcoating this by any means, and I don't do that in the book. I go back to Johnny R. Lee. He said something to me once that I thought was so poignant and meaningful. He said, we had all these wonderful traditions, these powerful spiritual traditions when the Jesuits arrived. If they had actually been open to what we had to offer and we could meet somewhere in the middle, that would have been a powerful, powerful religion. But that's not what happened. And so in some respects, the work with Tom Connolly, Mitch Michael, and Gibson Eli, in some respects was a way of, I think, rectifying some of that imbalance in the first 100 years of that Jesuit indigenous contact.
Do men and women have separate songs, or are they passed down together and sung together for various types of ceremony uses?
Yeah, it depends on the context. So I'll speak from my own experience in terms of how songs are used in our longhouse and in other spiritual contexts. Again, these are songs that are received by individuals that come from the spirit realm. And when someone is offered a song, if they receive it, because there are cases in which someone may decide they don't want to pick up that song because of the obligations I mentioned. But if they do pick up that song, it is theirs to sing and to utilize for the benefit of our communities while they're living. But we know of cases where songs have been carried by one person, they pass on, the song goes dormant for a time, and then someone else is given that song later on. So ultimately, the songs don't belong to an individual. And in terms of gender, the songs are not gendered. Both women and men might receive songs in this way. And in traditional contexts, we sing them together.
The relationship between the Jesuits and Native peoples in the Northwest appears to be quite different from what we know about the relationship in the Southwest. What do you see as a reason? Could it be the time period, culture, a different approach?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, first and foremost, it's the difference of 200 plus years. So the first Euro-Americans to set foot in the Columbia Plateau region were Lewis and Clark. They didn't arrive until 1805, right? And so in the Southwest, contact much, much earlier. I believe it's mid to late, you can correct me if someone knows, mid to late 16th century, I think. So the Jesuit reductions had taken place, and people like Pierre de Smet had learned from that and wanted to implement that approach. And so I think in some respects, the Jesuits had perhaps loosened up a little bit. It's still a long way to go. They're still very, very rigid. But, it's a difference of a few hundred years, I think is the primary reason. There was a much different approach in the Northwest, interior Northwest, as opposed to the Southwest. Incredible story, of course, in the Southwest with the Pueblos. The only documented case where the colonizers were tossed out for a time. I think it was 12 years or something like that. where the Pueblos ran them out. It's an inspiring story, and there's a reason that ceremonies in the Southwest, certainly in Pueblo communities, are very, very strong today. I talked about things going underground. They had 12 years to think about how they would approach this when these colonists inevitably would return, right?
And the next question says, not speaking for all Orthodox, but the cup dance seems to embody the decantate. What relationship is there between the cup dance and the community? Is this on purpose?
Yeah, you might be speaking to some particulars I'm not up on. What was the term that was used there? Do you mind repeating that, Annie? Sorry.
Sure. I'll spell it for you. It's DEACONETE.
Ah, yeah. Well, in terms of the relationship between the community and that song, it's now multifaceted in the sense that this was part of a pre-contact tradition, and then it was then brought into this indigenized or Indian Catholic Mass. And so multifaceted, but what I find very intriguing about it, I think what's very significant about it, again, given Tom Connolly's different orientation, the difference in which he approached these things compared to his predecessors, he recognized that there was inherent spiritual power in these things. In the same way that, I suppose in the reverse, my great uncle Gibson Eli was baptized Catholic when he was in his 50s. And he's known as the last medicine man of the Spokane tribe. It's not entirely true. There were folks after Gib and people that continue to use these songs and ceremonies to heal. But it's safe to say he was the last really powerful medicine person that we had. So here he was. It wasn't just in our Spokane communities. He was doing work up in Canada and all over the Western U.S., helping people that way. Here's someone with, this reputation as a medicine person who goes in for Catholicism. And these days, a lot of people look at that and go, what's the deal with that? You can't do both. Well, back then, different mindset, and I speculate that he's thinking along the lines of, well, hey, what could be wrong with more spiritual tools for the toolbox, right? And so I want to know more about this Catholicism and what it has to offer. And so Tom Connolly had a similar orientation. Our animal spirits, our Sumesh, these had been derided and discouraged, that interaction with the animal spirits, by Tom Connolly's predecessors. He equated them with angels. And that's a significant change. So he had an interest, an active interest in bringing these elements, including the cup dance, right, into this Catholic context. And by doing so, making for a more substantive, meaningful, and powerful religious service.
Thank you so much, Chad, for spending your time with our audience today and sharing your knowledge with us as well. We truly appreciate it.
It's been great. I want to thank everyone. Didn't get to hear your voices, but like many native languages, we don't have a word for goodbye. And so Nemhel Wiechtamen, we'll see you again. Lemlech, thanks.
And thanks to our audience for joining us. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.